My name is Grace Riley. I lead Government and Public Relations at CUTRIC, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our panel today on hydrogen's role in establishing a pathway to a green Canada. Before we get started, as part of our commitment to gender parity in transit, we are running a national survey to assess gender disparity. In the Canadian transit industry, research clearly shows that there's a stark difference between the number of women in senior leadership positions compared to men. We know these disparities exist, but we are less clear on why these disparities continue to persist. At CUTRIC, one of the ways in which we have committed to gender and racial equity has translated into a research partnership with the University of Windsor. This has allowed us to engage in learning more about the complexities of workplace environments. To increase the number of women in senior leadership positions, we need to understand the experiences of all individuals with different identities who are currently working in transit so we can make informed recommendations to transit organisations about best practices, policy and strategy. So today, we invite you to complete a short online survey to learn more about the social and organisational context that you work in. The survey is open to anyone in any role who works in the transit industry in Canada. It's anonymous, so we don't ask for your name or your organisation, and we will be sharing the findings of our research in the fall of 2021. If you have any questions about this survey or research, please contact the research team at the University of Windsor, who are listed in the survey link. And the survey should have been pasted in the chat for you to complete at your own convenience. So I am thrilled to welcome two female leaders in the Government of Canada and Clean Energy of Alberta today. So first, Debbie Scharf, Director General of the Clean Fuel Branch at Natural Resources Canada, is responsible for advancing the production and use of low carbon fuels in Canada. In addition to providing strategic advice on domestic and international low carbon fuel matters, her team delivers low carbon fuel programs in transportation and industry to help mitigate climate change, advance competitiveness of Canada's energy sector, and promote access to reliable, clean and affordable energy for all Canadians. So with that introduction, we are honoured to have you, Debbie, with us today. Also joining us today is Barbara Correll, Executive Director of the Natural Gas Strategy and Engagement Branch at Alberta Energy. As a steward of Alberta's energy system, the Department of Energy and its leadership team take a proactive approach to engaging the many perspectives, relationships and interactions within government, industry and stakeholders. So Barbara leads and provides strategic direction for the development and investments in natural gas value chains in Alberta. And today we look forward to her providing her insights into Alberta's hydrogen strategy. So welcome to you both and thank you so much for joining us today. So with that, we will be going into some deep dive presentations from both Debbie and Barbara, and then we'll be moving to a Q&A section. So we're really looking forward to all of the audience questions. But for now, Debbie, I will pass the virtual microphone over to you.
Thank you very much, Grace. I really appreciate that. And thanks for having me here today. I think I have to tell you to move the slides forward. So we'll just pop over to the next slide if you don't mind. I don't think I need to introduce myself once again, but I did want to say thank you for having me here today and to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about the essential role that hydrogen will play in Canada to meet its climate change and economic objectives. And from a federal perspective, a bit of information on our go forward plans. So next slide, please. Before I start any one of these presentations, I always just take a few moments to talk about the importance of clean fuels in Canada's economy. So it's our strong belief, and we think the evidence is behind us on this, that Canada's future economy is going to be powered by two equally important pathways: clean power or electricity and clean fuels. Most recently, even the IEA released a report on net zero by 2050, and it highlighted the critical importance of these fuels, of which hydrogen is one of them, although not the only one, with an estimate that will make up 20% of global energy supply by 2050. And modeling in Canada is actually estimating numbers that could be above 50%, given the nature of our economy. And that's why the Government of Canada released a Strengthen Climate Plan in December of last year, where there were new and enhanced measures to help increase the demand for these fuels. And just a couple of days after that, the Hydrogen Strategy for Canada was released. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about hydrogen, and the hydrogen story really is a Canadian story. We have been at this for a century, from the first Canadian patent for the large-scale industrial electrolyzer back in the early 1900s, to Ballard developing fuel cell stacks for buses in the 1980s, to not moving beyond demonstrations to actual deployments of these kinds of vehicles within the Canadian economy, and even globally, Canadian technology being used in the first commuter train in Germany using hydrogen, as well as the first marine and ferry application in Norway and Belgium. Next slide, please. So we're pretty good at hydrogen in Canada, and there's a number of reasons why. We have several natural advantages that go beyond just our innovative history and our global leadership. And the hydrogen strategy really spends some time speaking about what those natural advantages are. It includes things like our abundant feedstocks. Think about the access we have to clean electricity, to our oil and gas reserves, coupled with world-class leading carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Our strong renewable potential all could be used to produce clean, low-cost hydrogen. We have a very strong conventional energy sector, and I know Barb will probably speak about this in more depth from an Alberta perspective, that can be leveraged to produce hydrogen. Our expertise is known globally, with a lot of really strong international relationships and collaborations that will help position Canada as a global leader in the production and export of hydrogen. And that's coupled with the fact that we have really strategically located ports in our east and west coast that could service the markets of Asia and the markets of Europe to bring our clean, low-cost hydrogen to the world stage. And we are so uniquely positioned from our starting point. We are one of the top 10 global producers of hydrogen today, and one of the top producers of clean hydrogen in the world. And in fact, in Bécancour, Quebec, we now have the largest electrolyzer producing hydrogen in the world. Next slide, please. So we have all the ingredients for success. So the hydrogen strategy wasn't created in just a couple of months. It was actually created over the course of 3 years. And it is not a federal strategy. It is a strategy for Canada. And that's where it got its name. It's meant for all governments, it's meant for all stakeholders, and it's meant for the federal government as well. To develop the strategy, like I said, 3 years of analysis and information that culminated last summer in 14 engagement sessions with over 1,500 people that participated across 280 organizations. And there were some really clear findings that came out of all of that work. And I wanted to share a few of them with you because they really underpin a lot of where the hydrogen strategy is going to take us. And the first one is global momentum is growing. So there's no more time to wait, otherwise we risk falling behind, and speed is going to be important. The next thing is there's this idea of growing, I don't want to say a new market because that would be a little bit unfair to the history that we have here in Canada, but growing a nascent market into a broad hydrogen economy requires actions across the entire value chain. It is an end-to-end market approach. And not only does it require action across the whole value chain, which can make it quite complicated, it also requires that actions are sequenced over time. There are going to be some really immediate opportunities to help enable the production and the use of hydrogen. And then there are going to be opportunities that are going to take a little more time to come to fruition. And so we have to see the building of a hydrogen economy as a journey that will be decades long between now and 2050. But we do know that there are a couple great strategies that we can use right at the outset. And one of those is the concept of a hub. And Barb might even touch a bit on this in her presentation, because one of the first hubs in Canada is actually being built in Alberta. And this is the concept where you bring the producers, the distributors, and the users of hydrogen together to help improve investability or make the business case stronger. And that's a unique strategy for when you don't have a market where the suppliers are confident there'll be demand and the people using the product will be confident that there'll be supply. That is one great strategy that we're pursuing. A second one is around signature projects. We want to see big projects built in Canada because that is going to showcase to the world that Canada is able to make hydrogen and use hydrogen on a massive scale. The last thing I'm going to say in terms of our findings is we're really important to think about the carbon intensity of hydrogen. Historically, we talk a lot about pathways and colors. What we need to focus on is the ability to produce and use low cost, low carbon hydrogen. And that's a really important underlying theme of the strategy. And the size of the prize is worth it. We are talking about a fuel pathway that can potentially make up to 30% of Canada's energy mix by 2050. That's 190 megatons of greenhouse gas emission reductions. And at the same time, massive economic benefits to the country. Hundreds of thousands of jobs, many of which could come from our conventional energy sector, $50 billion of revenues domestically, another 50 billion internationally for exports, and millions of fuel cell vehicles used in transportation across the country. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit about what the hydrogen strategy says specifically with respect to transportation. So we kind of unpacked in the context of the hydrogen strategy what it means in different sectors, whether it be buildings, power generation, transportation. So from a transportation perspective, what we're seeing is, remember that 190 megatons in 2050? Well, a full third of that can come from the use of hydrogen in the transportation sector. And we know that some of the early opportunities in hydrogen is going to come from the deployment of things like buses, and next, medium and heavy duty vehicles, and then eventually into some of the harder other modes of transportation. So we know the opportunity is there, but there are a lot of challenges. And I'm sure for many of you in this audience, these won't be new or a surprise to you, but it's things like lack of available infrastructure to refuel vehicles, lack of supply of clean hydrogen, of which there's simply not enough in the country yet, lack of awareness, which can even extend to a perceived competition between zero emission technologies like battery electric, when from our perspective, 80% of the technology is the same, whether or not you're using battery electric or a fuel cell. There's also, of course, high upfront purchase costs and the lack of vehicle supply. So all of these are challenges that as we look forward in implementation of the hydrogen strategy, we have to tackle. So next slide, please. And the strategy recommends 32, it's actually 32 recommendations. I'm not going to go through any of them, in fact, in this presentation. And they're organized around 8 themes. And it was done this way because there's a lot of commonality of challenges across the different sectors and across production and end use in the value chain. So these recommendations are meant to guide where we go next. And again, not just for the federal government, but for all actors in the economy. Next slide, please. I want to touch a little bit on the how of implementation of the hydrogen strategy, but before I do that, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the recent announcements the federal government has made through its Strength and Climate Plan, December of last year, the Fall Economic Statement that came out just before that, I think end of November, as well as in the federal budget, that will all help grow a hydrogen economy and support the decarbonization of transportation. So the first one is the $1.5 billion Clean Fuels Fund that's going to help the build out new clean fuel production capacity in this country, including hydrogen. So that's going to help get that supply in place, at least start to help get that supply in place by de-risking those investments. We also have billions of dollars that was put into a net zero accelerator under the Federal Strategic Innovation Fund, and that's going to help drive down emissions in large industrial emitters, where they may pick up fuel switching as part of their industrial transformation. We also have a commitment to help support 5,000 new zero emission buses getting on the road with $1.5 billion and the Canadian Infrastructure Bank behind that. And then we're supporting clean technology development. May have seen some recent announcements the federal government has made to help transform Canada's automotive sector to be able to produce zero emission vehicles in this country. While not on this slide, I would also like to mention that there is a commitment to move to the next level of vehicle emission regulations and align with the most stringent in North America. And ultimately, the more stringent you make the regulations for light duty vehicles and medium and heavy duty vehicles, the more you're going to move the market towards zero emission vehicle technologies and opportunities. Next slide, please. So where are we going from here on the hydrogen strategy? So it's a little bit complicated, and it's actually a lot complicated. And it's complicated because we're trying to build an entire economy. And so the way we've decided to put this together is the implementation of the strategy will be overseen by what we call a strategic steering committee. And on that committee, there are going to be it's already established, there's going to be senior representatives from all levels of government, including our provincial and territorial colleagues. We have 30 industry associations that are on this committee, Indigenous businesses and organizations, and not-for-profits and researchers and academics who are providing the sort of strategic oversight to this body of work around implementation. And then there's approximately 15 or 16 working groups that are being established. Some have already been launched, some are getting phased in over the course of the year. And this is where the real work is going to happen. This is where the subject matter experts from all sectors of the economy can get together and start working on the tangible things that have to happen to help put those recommendations into practice and overcome those barriers and challenges. And as you can see, there is a working group on urban transit. And it's actually building off a lot of the work that CUTRIC and the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association have already done. And in fact, it's even co-chaired by the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association and Ballard, along with support from CUTRIC. So there's going to be a lot of really interesting work that's happening in that working group that would be of interest to this audience. Next slide. So vision, we have a bold vision for hydrogen in Canada. And what I'll say without having to go through all the statistics on this slide is we really think it hits the triple bottom line. It can deliver significant environmental outcomes as a fuel source, significant economic outcomes for the country, and significant social outcomes as we think about how to transition our workers to the new clean energy economy. And all of that together will help Canada succeed and thrive in the low carbon global economy of the future. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Really, really insightful presentation there. I cannot wait to ask you more questions about it, but the fact that you highlighted the importance of job creation when it comes to the hydrogen economy, the need to de-risk investments, and then also the fact that you're including Indigenous groups within the oversight of the strategy, really, really important, and CUTRIC were a huge support of that. So brilliant. Thank you so much, Debbie. So for our next presentation, I'd like to introduce Barbara to the virtual stage. So Barbara, over to you to take us through what's going on in Alberta right now.
Thank you very much. I have a short presentation that I will speak to, and I hope that participants in the conference will see the tremendous degree of alignment that we have between the federal government and the government of Alberta as we really look at what are the opportunities to unlock and expand that hydrogen value chain. So thank you very much, and Grace, appreciate this invitation and this opportunity to talk about what's happening here in Alberta within the hydrogen space. It really is a great time to be discussing hydrogen. There's been a lot of interest, certainly recently, on hydrogen. If we look back in the last few years, we've seen upwards of 30 nations announce hydrogen transition ambitions, including developing national strategies. So clearly the world feels that there is something here with respect to hydrogen and its ability to decarbonize our global economy and systems. As you are likely aware, there is also a lot of interest in hydrogen here in the province of Alberta. We currently are one of the largest manufacturers of hydrogen in the world. In fact, we make today, even as we speak, more than 2.3 million tons of hydrogen. In fact, that represents roughly 2/3 of Canadian production. So I'll just ask you actually to go into the next slide if I could. And there's a reason that we are a large manufacturer of hydrogen today, and that's because we are very strategically positioned to use hydrogen as an energy source. And we've also already found a way to integrate it into our energy processes and have used it, in fact, for many years. So if you look at what our advantages are, these are fairly typical ones. We in Alberta are blessed with an abundance of natural gas, which allows us to create hydrogen from natural gas. Largely as it's being created today, it's done so in the form of gray hydrogen, which means we're not capturing and storing that CO2, but certainly the ambition is to capture, store, sequester, and utilize that carbon in a fundamentally a different way. Our opportunity also is to expand beyond its current use, which is largely as a process element in petrochemical production, as well as in refining and upgrading, and really look to lever off of the knowledge that we have, to lever off of the expertise and the skills that our technicians and engineers have within the value chain. Because certainly this is a world-class resource, and it represents not only a significant opportunity to expand and diversify our economy, but it also represents a significant opportunity to decarbonize what are typically considered hard to decarbonize sectors of our economy. So that's in the world of our industrial sectors, our ag sectors, our upstream oil and gas sectors. As we speak to advantages, I'll also highlight, though, the fact that we are blessed in terms of the province's geology. Our geology is ideally suited to capture and store carbon emissions. And early investments that were taken by governments as well as by industry in this world of CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, have meant that we already have infrastructure in place and a backbone really that allows us to move both that hydrogen and the CO2 produced from natural gas. Now, as many of you will know, we already have a number of CCUS operations built and operating in Alberta. For example, one facility here in Alberta is the Shell Quest project, has already captured more than 5 million tons of CO2. New third-party analysis suggests that Alberta can be one of the most cost-effective suppliers of hydrogen in the world through the expansion of this network and utilizing our abundant low-cost natural gas. I'm going to move on now to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about a hydrogen roadmap that the province of Alberta is currently creating, and I will highlight and give a shout out to Debbie and the federal government. In going forward and creating a hydrogen roadmap, the province of Alberta has been very determined that we would align effort and synthesize our strategy as much as possible and practical with the federal government. And so I think it's a credit to the excellent work that the federal government did in creating the national hydrogen strategy that has allowed us, as we've gone forward with stakeholders, to create a very robust and forward-looking hydrogen roadmap for the province. This roadmap, I can share with you, is in its final stages. It is currently going through the government review process. It is the product of an extensive engagement over roughly a 6-month process. We connected into upwards of 100 different organizations, probably between 200 and 250 stakeholders provided direct feedback on what they felt our opportunity was within the hydrogen value chain. And this roadmap, when it is approved and released, really will help leverage our existing strengths and opportunities to build out this sector where production and consumption can flourish. In essence, what we are proposing to do is to bring forward a strategy that is very much anchored to the concept of clean hydrogen. And when I say that, what I mean is we're really looking to remain technology agnostic, whether it be hydrogen produced from that green or electrolysis production pathway, or it come from that blue natural gas-based production pathway. At the end of the day, we're looking to advance a strategy that has very low carbon or is carbon neutral. And in doing so, we are calling this clean hydrogen. You can see here on this slide that we have identified 5 markets for hydrogen. These are not new markets. If you look to the federal hydrogen strategy, if you look internationally, these are the same pathways that most nations have identified. Specifically, of course, heating market, which is in residential and commercial. That's an opportunity for us to blend hydrogen initially at lower volumes and ultimately looking at pure hydrogen to heat our house. The next pathway is power generation and storage. Again, similar to heating, what we're looking to do is blend volumes of hydrogen into that power generation pathway, ultimately looking to be using pure hydrogen. I'll focus a little bit on exports. What we heard during our engagement is exports really are the big tickets, the big opportunity for us as a province. We also, though, recognize that there are challenges within that export pathway, most notably in the logistics and supply chain. We can make hydrogen very successfully here, but there are challenges with getting and transporting hydrogen long distance. And so certainly our ambition is to access that export pathway by 2030. And we likely will look to build slow. We likely will look to begin to export in the form of a hydrogen derivative, and that likely will be ammonia. Now, mobility obviously will be the most interesting pathway for this audience here. We think we have some tremendous advantages in this space, and I will speak to those later on, but certainly work that has been led by Dr. David Lazell and Caesar has given us an initial look into what this opportunity could be, and we feel that there are indeed many opportunities in Alberta. Now, industrial process is another significant market opportunity for us, and I will say this is largely where hydrogen is being used today. In essence, what we're proposing to do, though, is to take gray hydrogen and turn it into blue. So anywhere where hydrogen is currently being used without CCUS, we're looking to have that transformed into that blue hydrogen. So moving back then to our hydrogen roadmap, this really is an ambitious plan that will be very actionable, that will see us transition hydrogen across our economy. Once released, the hydrogen roadmap will provide that framework for government and industry action. And certainly we recognize hydrogen's ability to both grow our economy and decarbonize those hard to abate sectors that I referenced earlier. I will speak before I move on to the next slide to a few additional elements. And one is the Alberta Petrochemicals Incentive Program, which this is a bit curious because it's been in place now for not quite a year, but certainly it is likely our key production enabler. And APIP is a program that allows companies that are investing in hydrogen production to recoup through a grant up to 12% of eligible capital costs. So with this funding, which is provided once the facilities are up and running, we feel we've got a very, very powerful incentive to allow companies to come into the province and to take those critical investment decisions that will allow us to move beyond the current use of hydrogen. And the good news certainly is that this program has no ceiling on it. And so certainly we feel it is a very significant incentive on the production side. Now, moving again into this hydrogen pathway, the opportunity for us, we feel that hydrogen will not only create jobs and economic opportunities, but it will decrease emissions and support the province's climate ambitions. Let's speak a little bit about that, because really Alberta does have a long tradition of taking action on climate issues that is backed by more than 2 decades of climate-related programs and policies. These really have paved the way for us to move forward into hydrogen. We were the first jurisdiction to place a price on carbon for all large emitters across all sectors. We've invested billions of dollars in technologies that reduce or even eliminate emissions, such as CCUS that I mentioned earlier. Importantly, both government and industry have shown leadership and a willingness to collaborate to advance technology breakthroughs in this sector. For example, a consortium of oil sands companies recently announced an alliance to reach a net zero by 2050, including Cenovus, Imperial Oil, and Suncor. Hydrogen certainly will be an important way in which they can achieve these ambitions. Another example I would give you is Emissions Reduction Alberta. It's providing funding for pilot run by ATCO that is blending hydrogen with natural gas directly into consumers' homes. So I think you'll see a pattern here. While we are developing our hydrogen roadmap, we're also looking to implement. And I think that's really quite exciting. Debbie did mention this, that we are also collaborating with the federal government on the the Heartland Transition Accelerator initiative, and that is really proving to be an effective vehicle. They turn my lights out here. To accelerate hydrogen's deployment into our economy. I'll also highlight a very recent initiative, which is Air Products' plans to build a $1.3 billion net zero hydrogen complex here in Edmonton. This is literally hot off the presses. When completed, it will stand out as a world scale project that includes the liquefaction facility and will accelerate the use of hydrogen across our economy. So this is tremendous momentum, I believe, that is occurring in Alberta. And I can say, I feel Alberta has quickly stepped into that leadership position in Canada in terms of deploying hydrogen across our economy. Next slide, please. So I want to focus now, if I could, on mobility. Certainly, again, that will be most interesting to you. The ATCO, Air Products announcement, I think really does demonstrate potential to produce hydrogen for multiple applications, but specifically into that mobility pathway. The plant will, of course, capture around 3 million tons of CO2 annually, and it will produce enough liquid hydrogen to fuel every transit agency across Alberta. Now, you likely are familiar with the Alberta Zero Emissions Truck Electrification Collaboration. That's, of course, known as AZTEC, this pilot. This is an early demonstration project to test hydrogen's ability to fuel heavy freight sector. These are Class 8 vehicles. Certainly, our analysis shows that the best mobility opportunity for hydrogen likely is in that heavy duty transport, whether it be those semis, whether it be oil sands, the big trucks up in the oil sands, whether it be hydrogen locomotives within the railway business, whether it be forklifts, etc. So really see a tremendous opportunity for hydrogen in that space. Now, the AZTEC initiative is led by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. The project, as I mentioned, is partially funded through Emissions Reduction Alberta, and it is intending to kick off truck runs in the fall of 2021, which is mere months away now. We also understand that municipalities are exploring hydrogen bus opportunities, and I'm familiar with one that is planned for the Capital Region and Calgary. So beyond these examples, hydrogen sees a tremendous opportunity for the hydrogen potential to reduce our emissions in this mobility sector. We recognize that all projects, whether big or small, have to start somewhere, and demonstration projects are the key to furthering deployment, commercialization, and innovation. And certainly our hydrogen roadmap will be heavily focused on accelerating these pilots. We also will continue to work with partner agencies such as Emissions Reduction Alberta and Alberta Innovates to ensure that we bring that whole government approach to supporting the sector. So next slide, please. This is going to be my close. I want to acknowledge again with my federal counterparts and provincial colleagues here today, Alberta really does regard hydrogen as being a critical part of our integrated energy system. It will be critical to ensuring our energy sector is very much future focused. And as we think about how this exciting new source of energy can be deployed across our sector, we really have concluded that being aligned across the country, working directly with industry to address and remove barriers will be critical to its success. We also, of course, are looking to work with nations and international investors to ensure that we can meet the demand for ultra low carbon hydrogen as other nations look to reduce their own national emissions, pardon me. And so certainly this is a tremendous opportunity, I think, to deliver an exciting new source of energy to the world. We recognize that transportation and storage will be key elements where these harmonized expectations are critical, and national and international markets will need to work together. This collaboration within Canada will help provide investor certainty and pave the way to serve customers both domestically and internationally in the coming decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was an amazing presentation. Getting a little sneak peek into your hydrogen roadmap is very helpful, so thanks for that. And you highlighting Edmonton's plant is really key as well. The fact that you're, as a province, being very future focused when it comes to the energy sector, I think it's a great story to tell. So thank you so much. Debbie, we'll bring you back as well to the picture, and we can kick off our Q&A. Hopefully we can get as many questions in as we can. But maybe first I'll just start off with the fact that we know that we have to be net zero by 2050. That's clear, that's what the government's put out. So really, how will hydrogen actually support Canada's climate goals? And Debbie, I know you touched on this a little, but wondering if you can go into it a little bit further for us.
Okay, well, it's interesting because I've seen a lot of modeling done on, what things are going to look like in 2050, and it all depends on what assumptions you're going to make. So I've seen lots of different things, and I think just looking at the IEA study versus some analysis that's been done in Canada, and you see 20% here, 30, 50, 60% here for clean fuels, it goes to show that we can't 100% predict how things are going to go. But there's a couple things that I think we could say with certainty. One, hydrogen's going to play a major role. And I always say to people, why is it? Some people say, well, we had a false start in the early 2000s. Who's to say it's going to not be the same thing today? And usually my answer is 20 years ago, net zero wasn't on the table. And today net zero is on the table. So in a world of incrementality, you could think about a little bit of a better vehicle emission standard or a little bit of a better technology. But once we're getting into a world where we have these really tough to abate sectors, really difficult, the high heat applications, the big industrial applications, I call it the planes, the trains and boats and heavy duty trucks, you need a fuel solution. And I think hydrogen offers people can say, wow, it's possible to have a fuel that is zero carbon. And to me, I'm not sure everyone always believed that. And now we have to have it. I'm actually convinced one day we might have a negative emission fuel. It could happen. And so, but the point being is that we're outcome focused. We have to get to energy sources that are going to get us the emission profile that we need. And hydrogen has all the ingredients to be that. So I think we'll never know for certain exactly how many cars in Canada will be fuel cells versus battery electric, exactly how many trucks will be battery electric versus a fuel cell. But we do know that we have a series of technologies that are all part of the mix, and we have to push forward with them because they're all going to form some part of that pathway. And we know hydrogen is one of those. So that's probably as far as I can go without a crystal ball. But that's why we're pressing forward on electrification, and we're pressing forward on clean fuels, including hydrogen.
Yeah, I really appreciate that answer, Debbie. Barbara, maybe I can turn this audience question to you.
Sure.
So we have this, 2050 goal in mind, and your province obviously has your own goals in mind as well. But, what are some of the milestones that we as a country and as provinces have to meet between now and 2050? Does Alberta have certain milestones in 5-year or 10-year increments? What is your plan? I don't know if you can tell us any of the juicy goods.
Well, thank you for that question. I think certainly moving forward with a hydrogen roadmap and what we regard certainly as a bold strategy to deploy it across our economy, that's part of it. And I go back to what our outcomes are in the hydrogen roadmap. One is to expand and diversify our provincial economy. If you produce hydrogen from natural gas, you've in effect created a premium market. And so certainly as we look to replace diminishing markets for our natural gas, having a new market in form of clean hydrogen really is obviously, for obvious reasons, quite attractive to the province of Alberta. That second objective, though, which is to decarbonize hard to abate sectors, is really critical as well. And in focusing on that, though, what I would say is we need to be mindful of the fact that industry is coming forward with their own ambitions and their own plans on how they will remove CO2 from their process. And when we were doing our engagement, one of the things that we heard was, look, don't try to make hydrogen the only solution. Hydrogen is part of the solution, but there are other solutions. And in some cases, quite frankly, doing a direct capture and storage of carbon is the better solution from an economic perspective and from an environmental outcome perspective. And so certainly as we've gone forward, what we've wanted to do is to recognize that hydrogen will be part of this integrated energy system that Alberta will have. Now, with respect to the world, I think you can apply that as well. I think one of the reasons that we've had so many stops and starts on hydrogen is because it has been lifted up as almost the panacea. It's going to solve everyone's problems. And I don't think that that quite frankly is. But if we incorporate it into our portfolio of energy sources, I think we can do something really quite powerful with that.
Yeah, appreciate your comments there. And maybe just switching gears a little. So obviously with hydrogen and the hydrogen roadmaps and strategies that are coming out, transit is going to be a factor within this. Like that's very clear. It's a huge possibility. We have Ballard on our, back door step, just waiting for hydrogen fuel cell buses to really grace our roads here. So in terms of demonstration projects, like they're key to furthering the development of hydrogen in the whole Canada and Canada's energy mix. So how will your policies, maybe Debbie, I'll pose this to you first, but the Government of Canada and Natural Resources, how are you going to be supporting these transit demonstration projects over the next couple of years?
Yeah. So a couple of things I'll say, because we don't operate in any space, all spaces, but we do operate in a few spaces. So, one of the things that we've spent, it's a bit historical, so I'll start there. But we've done a lot of work on the charging side of things, EV and ZEV charging side of things. And I want to use that as an example of the fact that we have had targeted demonstration programs that are really about kind of testing different ways of doing things, learning from the results, and then taking those learnings to be able to move things forward. I think that sort of a big signature piece right now is the investment in the medium and heavy duty trucks in Alberta, and NRCan did put a couple $1 million on the table. We do have a lot of investments on the refueling side of the business. And that's an area that I think that you could see a little bit more of. We just had some funding recapitalized on the zero emission infrastructure program. So you'll see more hydrogen refueling stations coming to the market. They're expensive, but it is a key enabling piece to allow the market to move forward. We also have the 5,000 bus commitment, and the model of the Canada Infrastructure Bank is pretty interesting in that it's giving you sort of an upfront cost break, but it doesn't ask you to pay the money back. The money's being paid back from the savings and actually operating the vehicle. And that upfront cost is really important. And the trick is, like, how do you get from like demo to deployment? Like that's always the trickiest part. And some people will argue when you're talking about the transit side of things, like, are we already practically in the deployment world, or are we still in the demo world? It's not to say that all the problems have been solved, but there's tens of thousands of vehicles in this space being deployed across the world. And I think it's a question of how do you deal with the upfront cost? How do you deal with the charging needs, sort of refueling needs, to make sure that the operations can work smoothly? And so, yeah, sure, you do still need some demos, but I think, we want to be pressing into the deployment world. And there's a couple of programs there to help the industry along.
100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, we need to be moving forward with deployment and really getting these buses on the road, not in one or two bus pilots, because there's a whole other story about that, right? But like getting more buses quicker, and the fact that your governments are happy to help that along is very promising to hear. Barbara, did you want to add something there?
Yeah. I think really what I would just add to Debbie's response is I think industry has been really excellent in beginning that process of proof of concept. and really has advanced the technology. And that's a space where I think governments can lean in through providing funding supports. But here in Alberta, one of the messages that we've heard that's critical for the mobility sector is you need to have available hydrogen for those fuel cells. Because if you consider today, really all of the hydrogen that we are producing currently is going into industrial process. And so there needs to be certainty that hydrogen, firstly, will be available for these pilots to advance. And I think that's where the hydrogen roadmap really can provide that certainty and clarity that from a policy perspective, the province of Alberta is very serious about seeing hydrogen deployed across our economy. So that's kind of the first thought that I have. Partnering in the refueling infrastructure, I think, is another critical piece. There are elements along that supply chain that still need work. And this is where I think it's going to take alignment of effort between industry, associations, and government to move forward more quickly into this space. And the last thing I would say is, well, I think we've got good proof of concept, we can probably advance this further. And so having governments play that connective tissue role to create that innovation ecosystem, I think is really quite critical. And so that means, connecting research institutes, universities, associations, groups like Emissions Reduction Alberta, Alberta Innovates, to really have everyone pulling together is the way in which we're going to move that value chain forward. And the last thing I would say is that our analysis that we've done through the University of Alberta suggests that really that mobility pathway is one of the best opportunities, I would say, to have in the near term a self-sustaining pathway. Others such as heat, power gen, the economics are not quite as attractive as they are within mobility. And so, these are things collectively, I think, that we need to address, and we can do that by working together.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you bring up the university piece, Barbara, because at CUTRIC, we are all about technology innovation, and we've actually funded many research programs on to be able to assist the development of the hydrogen economy. So an example of this would be with the Government of Ontario. They funded a $10 million research and development program for CUTRIC, and Ballard was able to complete hydrogen fuel cell research with the University of Waterloo. So really the government's being able to invest in the R&D portion of this is really going to help to drive things forward as well. So maybe just wanted to ask you a bit of something on this is, how do your governments promote the R&D when it comes to hydrogen? And Debbie, I know that you had mentioned in your presentation that there's the $300 million fund to advance CCUS. So wanted to dive in there a little bit deeper, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you are right. So $300 million to help support research, development, and demonstration to improve the commercial viability of CCUS, which is going to be critical to help reduce the cost of hydrogen. So that is the connection point in there. And also, as a corollary to that, the federal government is looking at a CCUS strategy as well that it is talking to stakeholders and other governments about. So I think the CCUS piece is pretty important as that pathway to get to the low cost, low carbon hydrogen. I will also say, though, under the hydrogen strategy, the slide came and went pretty fast, and there were a lot of small boxes on there, but there actually is another working group on innovation specifically. And while it's not unique to transit or any one particular pathway, it is an opportunity to bring the researchers, both public and private, together to talk about the type of innovation work that has to happen to advance the hydrogen economy. And those working groups were not they weren't created by us, to be honest. They were actually created from the feedback that we received from all those stakeholder sessions I spoke about, and were identified as those priority areas to advance work in. So I think that's going to be a really great space to identify what are those priorities that we should be working on together, and how do we get projects in play. So stay tuned for that. But maybe what I'll also say is we do actually have an entire part of NRCan that works on energy innovation, and they do a lot of collaboration on innovation as well. For example, there's a clean growth collaboration community, which is a place that all these people involved in innovation research come together to talk and disseminate the work that they're doing. And so even as part of our programming on the innovation side, there's a lot of time spent bringing together all the parts of the economy and the researchers to talk about the opportunities, the challenges, what the research is saying. So like Barb said, I think these kinds of ways of convening, it is a natural role that a government can play to convene, also to support financially, we do that too, but to convene, that is a natural role we play, and we tend to do it fairly well. And I think we're setting that up under the hydrogen strategy, but we can also leverage the regular ongoing energy innovation that's happening in those venues as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for your insights there. And I think at CUTRIC as well, we are firm believers in collaboration, bringing everybody to the table, because there's no point in having a conversation with A and B and then D is standing over here doing its own thing. It doesn't make any sense. So very, very much happy to hear that you're in for collaboration, and happy to hear that the UTTF, the Urban Transit Task Force, is going really well. I know that CUTRIC's involved in that. So yeah, great to hear. I know that we are over time, so I wanted to just maybe ask one final question on hubs. You both mentioned hubs, and I think it's a really important piece to close out with. So Debbie, you noted that global hydrogen momentum is growing. So how do we really keep up? You suggested the hydrogen hubs. So what is the Government of Canada doing to support the creation of hubs? Are you supporting Alberta on Alberta's first hub that's coming together? Maybe you can both shed a little bit of light on that for me.
Yeah. On the Alberta Hub, so not through NRCan, but through our Western Economic Diversification Regional Economic Development Agency, there was a partnership with the province of Alberta, as well as the private sector, to help set up some of the infrastructure around the hub, because the hub, these hubs, they need a little bit of support to get them going, and then they're going to need support with the actual projects themselves. And I think Air Products, Barb talked about that a lot. I think we're going to see more of those, and the concept is supply and demand coming together, and that's the critical piece. And so as governments, we need to think about how we work together as a province and a federal government, and even within the federal government across our departments, where we have these funding opportunities to bring them together so that we can get these projects going. And those are the kinds of conversations that we're actually having amongst ourselves in government, is how to do that, because we recognize that it's only in bringing our levers together for maximum impact that we can affect change. I can't always control what the government asks me to deliver as a program. I sort of get some parameters around that, but it's incumbent on us to look for where the other opportunities are to merge funding to help get those projects together. Air Products, why it's really interesting and why I think we'll see more of that, is because it's not just about producing hydrogen. It's also thinking about what are the add-on pieces to make sure the end user can get the hydrogen. If it was just making it and saying, okay, I've got it, but where are those opportunities? How am I going to put business deals together to make sure that the hydrogen I'm making is going to get used where it's needed? And I think even the producers of hydrogen are really thinking about that and bundling these projects together. And then of course you have organizations like the Transition Accelerator, who are actively working to put these hubs together and working with government to do that. So the spaces could be perceived as being a bit messy because there's a lot happening at the same time, but there's really a lot of work going on to getting the levers lined up. The companies are really thinking about making and where it's going to go. And then there's other actors in the economy like the Transition Accelerator who's saying, how do we get these hubs up and going? And it's all actually working in the background. And I think we're making some good progress.
I'm glad to hear that. And we've been facing the same challenges, of course, with our own fuel cell bus demonstration project in my way in Mississauga. How do we get the hydrogen from the facility in Markham to Mississauga, right? So we have that whole process and now panned out and ready to go for this funding proposal. So it's really an interesting concept to be able to actually map it out and then make sure that there's the possibilities to scale up as well and make that, you know, wherever the hydrogen is coming from, that it can get to everywhere that it needs to go. Barbara, I don't know if you had any final comments on
Yeah,
hubs?
just a very quick comment. I'd say certainly unlocking that supply chain challenge is really critical. One of the things I really like about the Transition Accelerator is the fact that they can move in fairly aggressively into spaces that us in government, quite frankly, can't. And as Debbie knows best, in government, there is a process by which officials will bring policy forward to decision makers, and that can be a lengthy process, quite frankly. What's brilliant about the Transition Accelerator is they can lean in, they can accelerate, they don't have to have it perfect. And if they need to adapt and pivot based on their learnings, they can do so. And so I think it's a really helpful mechanism by which Alberta, certainly in this case, can lever off of existing industrial strengths in that part of our province and do a bit of beta testing and adapt, pardon me, based on what we learn. And that's much more effective and efficient through a mechanism like the Transition Accelerator. So certainly we've been very delighted with what they've been able to do to date.
It's really great to hear, and I actually do have a follow-up call with someone from the Transition Accelerator, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more. But Barbara, thanks so much for bringing that up. We are well over time, so I just wanted to say thank you both so much for your insights today. I think we could probably talk for hours on this topic. It's very, very interesting, very, very timely, and I know our audience appreciates your time. So just want to wrap up. Thank you both, to Barbara, to Debbie, and to our audience who have come to join us today. I would be remiss if I didn't say fill out our gender parity survey if you've yet to do so. It's a really key part of what we're trying to do here at CUTRIC and across the transit agency, trying to overcome the disparity within our female and male leadership at the top in transit. So please fill that out if you've yet to do so. Our networking session is also beginning at 2:45 Eastern time, so in about 30 minutes. So please register for that, grab a coffee, grab a drink, wherever you are, join us for a great conversation. And we have plenty of afternoon sessions to finish out the 3-day conference. So once again, thank you very much to you both, and we will see you all in the next session.
Thank you.